Hi there, and welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And today we're going to be we're going to be talking about what to focus on in a scene, a chapter, or a book. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And Dave, you can go first.
Right. One episode of Seven Stones, written, polished, and published. Finished off formatting ebooks for my wonderful client, and I still haven't managed to crack the tail end of my short story, so I've written half of another one instead to see if I could reset my brain by doing something completely different.
Cool. I've done nothing directly writing related. What I've been doing is working on that website that I keep talking about. And I got a bunch of stuff put into that. It's been incredibly hard work this week. I've been doing 5 hours a day on top of my day job. So that's been a bit taxing. So I've got three things. Maybe I can talk a little bit briefly about it. I got three things that I'm trying to put in for when I launch it. The beta reading thing that I talked about. The other there's the tracking your writing sessions thing. I think I might have mentioned that before. It's just a timer essentially, but it records all of your writing sessions. So then when you go back afterwards, you can say, okay, that book took me 150 hours or whatever, and it was this much writing and this much whatever. And the last thing was something I came up with this week, which was why I then had lots more work to do than I expected to do, which was a thing which will allow you to put the details for your book into the system and then will generate your product pages for you. So what that means is if you have an affiliate code for Amazon, it will generate a button that points to the correct Amazon for that person's country with the correct affiliate code. It'll have the product description that you've added to the system. And in a version 2, which is not going to be in launch, but version 2 will allow for multiple product descriptions and then will tell you which was the best performing, and may even allow for multiple covers and tell you which is the best performing. I can, mix and match them. So you can say, okay, this cover with this product description, and different taglines and all that kind of stuff. So essentially, what I'm trying to do is make a system that will cover everything from when you finish a book until you're happy it's, finished on the store. So writing a book is obviously tricky, but there's plenty of systems that already help with writing the book. Whereas this is kind of all the stuff I'm not very good at, that I would like it if there was a system would help me do. Like knowing, okay, this product description is better than this one. And another thing I came up with today, which I can mention, it's going to be far in the future, but just as an idea of what I'm thinking putting into the system, was allowing illustrators or book cover designers to join the system and put all their pre-made covers up. And then you select 10 pre-made covers and you get your readers to say, oh, I like that one, or I like that one. And you get a voting on what pre-made cover, the same as 99 Designs does for special custom covers. It'd be nice if there was the same kind of thing for pre-made covers. And even illustrators themselves or book cover designers could put their covers up and allow people who like that genre to vote and say, I like this one better than this one. Like a kind of a competition thing between different book cover designers. And that would allow them to then say, this is a 5-star cover that military science fiction fans have said is a really good cover, which, would then sell their cover faster, hopefully. So I've got loads of ideas. It's all about, as I say, about after you finish the book, coming up with beta reading it so that you can fix any flaws that are in it, boring bits and that kind of stuff, or confusing or spelling mistakes, whatever it happens to be, and getting the right cover, the right product description, all that kind of stuff. So that's the plan. And at the moment, it's looking like I've got an early version sometime in the next month or two. But then, as I say, that's version 1 with just a few basic things, and then I'll just keep putting extra stuff onto it. The same as the Scrivener's guys said, they're both writers, I think, the guys who launched Scrivener, and they said they made a system because there wasn't one for what they wanted to do. This is a system for what I want to do. I'm crap at marketing. I want something that helps me market and tells me what's good and what's bad, and crowdsources the testing. So yeah, that's kind of an aside, but that's what I've been doing this week, is getting all the system together, so that hopefully sometime soon I can launch with the 3 basic things in it, and then maybe add a feature every month or two. So that's that. So yeah, on to our topic. So what to focus on in a scene, a chapter, or a book. So I was reading Stephen Pressfield's book this week, which is called Nobody Wants to Read Your Bleep. Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. So in that, he was saying that the focus for the book needs to be a theme before you start writing, which is something, I don't know, it's been open for debate a bit. I've heard people saying that you write the book first and then you discover the theme, or even people saying, no, the theme is up to the reader to discover in the book. So his idea is, in the book, he gives an example of he's telling the tale. If he was telling the tale of his grandma in the Pilgrim days, going across from the East Coast to the West Coast of America, that he would have to pick a theme for that. He couldn't just tell, so first grandma started here, and then she went here, and then she went here, and then she went here, and then there was trouble here, and then there was this and that and the other. That there has to be an idea behind it. And he said, what was it? The grand kind of ambition of expansion, the kind of idea of trying for something better than what you have, was his theme. So then the focus of the book would be the point at which his grandmother achieves that at great cost, basically. So I thought, since I just read that today, that might be an interesting kind of starting off point. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I agree with his thought that a book has to have a thing. I disagree with him calling that thing theme. I'd call that change. The difference between a narrative and a story is that with a narrative, readers are reading it for the facts. So your grandmother is going across the country. If you want to know about traveling across the country, or living in that particular era, or being a woman in that society, or whatever, a narrative is great. You want the events, and then you put the meaning on them because you have your theories for what you want, and the facts support them, refute them, and you put it together with 6 other stories about traveling across the country, or 6 other stories about women, or whatever, and come up with your history, your sociology. Whereas for fiction, readers want a change. It's often said that the basis of fiction is conflict, but if I take it one step back, it's not conflict, it's change. That for fiction to be entertaining, the point at which the book starts and the point at which the book ends have to be different for the protagonists. If someone starts off as, I'm going to travel across the country, and travels across the country, and their traveling across the country doesn't change them, that's potentially accurate, but it's not exciting, it's not interesting to the reader. Whereas coming out the other end different will interest the reader. And it doesn't really matter how that difference comes. So I wouldn't call that theme. That's character development. And theme is more the message that you take from the fact the character's changed. So if the character discovers God on the journey, then the theme of the book might be hope, it might be idealism, it might be delusion, but to an extent, you're writing the change. You're not writing the book, so the reader, every single reader reads it and goes, well, yes, clearly the point of this book is to talk about how you can get through things by discovering the truth of Christianity or whatever.
I mean, his point, what he was saying was that the entire book should be structured around the theme. So if his theme was daring to try for something that's risky because it could lead to a better life, say that was the theme, that he's saying that the protagonist should be supporting your point of view, that's an accurate statement, that you should you should try things that are risky and risk failing in order that you could have a better life. And the antagonist doesn't have to be a person, it can be the thought that you're going to fail and end up worse off than you were before. And he was saying, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but that every character in the book should be a view of that theme. They should have, their own, there should be, say, a curmudgeonly old person who's saying, no, you have to stay here because it's too risky. You'll lose everything. You'll end up dead in a ditch. That you should have, another person who's inspiring and saying, I always take big risks and I always win. It's the person who takes the risks that gets the best out of life, or whatever it happens to be. And that every single person that's in that story is basically echoing the theme or talking about the theme in a different way. Now, that's certainly not the way I would write books, not the right way I write books at the moment.
No, it's binary reductionism. It's saying, here is the antagonist is the opposite of A. Everyone is all about this thing. Whereas I write books where everyone has their own viewpoint. They are, to steal a phrase from someone I can't remember the name of, the hero of their own story. So the chap who sells coffee to the character is just a throwaway character who sells them a cup of coffee. Their interaction, the barrister interacts with the person as if in their story they've sold a coffee, and the protagonist interacts with the barrister in their story as if they've bought a coffee. And it's a trivial little thing, but you can't, reducing it to, well, you've got to buy coffee in a way that reflects upon the theme. It's like, well, no, because then your character is an angel or a devil or some other fundamentally mono-focused thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that case, you risk them being it's Mary Sue, isn't it? I keep mixing it up. Betty Sue, Peggy Sue.
Mary Sue's the one who is. Mary Sue's a perfect, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you're writing, say you're writing a story, say you were writing Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is the smartest person in the world. He's smarter than Hermione. He's braver than Ron. He's, the best magician possible. Blah 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 blah. Those would be the incredibly boring stories. And if the theme was good triumphing over evil, or love conquers all, or whatever it happens to be, I think it wouldn't be as interesting and as shaded a story as it is. Like, the point is that Harry has times where he does things that would be considered bad, or I'm trying to think of one, but I can't off the top of my head. But there are plenty of places where he does things that are not necessarily the honorable way to go, or whatever. So as I say, I don't agree with Stephen Pressfield, and the book. It was interesting to get someone else's perspective. I mean, he's talking about how he started as a screenwriter. He started in advertising, but then he was a screenwriter for a number of years, and that he brings a screenwriter's point of view to writing books. And I think in terms of a screenplay, it may be closer to that kind of point. That you tend to have characters who are just talking about one thing in a 90-minute movie because you only have 90 minutes to discuss it. But I think in a novel you can have more shades of grey in the characters, perhaps. But you're right, that to go back to your point, that it is change that should be the focus of every scene, chapter, and book. I think that the problem with the Mary Sue character is that they're perfect at the start, so they can't be any better at the end. So I'm reading a book at the moment that the character at the start is perfectly trained for the situation that he finds himself in. So nothing is a challenge. He's just, oh yeah, I know what to do. Here's my 10-point plan. Everyone follow me. And so far there's been nothing. He's got no weaknesses. And there needs to be, I think, there should be something at the start. If he was, for example, incredibly arrogant and, know-it-all, and then the course of the story shows that he doesn't actually know it all. His training fails, and he gets them in trouble. Maybe someone gets killed because his training wasn't adding up to the task or something. Then there's a potential for change where he could realize, okay, maybe my knowledge isn't everything, and I need to listen to other people sometimes. So that, again, to your point, is change. There needs to be some way for the character to change.
And going back to Aristotle's somewhat high-level view of stories, there are two types of stories: comedies and tragedies. And in a tragedy, someone starts off in a good place and then ends up in a bad one. And in a comedy, someone starts off in a bad place and ends up in a better one. And there are two drivers to it: the virtues of the character and the flaws of the character. So if we take, say, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus starts off as a relatively okay person, and he's not right at the top of Greek society, but he's doing well for where he is. And spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read the story that's only been out for centuries, he he returns home having been separated from his parents since early childhood, and gets into an argument with a man on the road, kills him without realizing it's his father, and ends up marrying his mother. And he builds and builds. He gets better and better. So he starts off as a wanderer, wins a fight, ends up becoming king of Greece, and this is where the idea of classical flaws and modern flaws diverge, loses everything because he's unwittingly committed incest. But incest is a flaw. So despite the fact he doesn't know about it, he ends up a blind beggar and so that's a tragedy driven by his flaws. But you could also parse the story of, say, St. Paul as a tragedy, because he starts off a respected Roman, grows in power, and then, because of his virtue in accepting Christianity, he loses his place in society and becomes an outsider, as it were, because he's joined a minority sect. So, I think what the I don't think the focus is on theme. I think a better focus is on change and reversal. That the characters' good points and bad points pull them in different directions. And for a truly interesting story, sometimes doing the right thing doesn't get you all of the results that you'd want if we were rewarded always fairly. And sometimes doing the wrong thing gets you closer to achieving your goal. So
you have to. So I was thinking as well that it's multiple changes make the most interesting stories. So I was thinking of Fight Club. So in Fight Club, Edward Norton's, there might be maybe a slight spoiler for Fight Club, I guess. Edward Norton's character starts off loving buying material things, but completely miserable. And by the end of the movie, there are no material things and he's happy. So you've got the reversal of both of those things. His internal change is from unhappy to happy, and his external change is from having the things from IKEA and so on that people think will make them happy to having absolutely nothing. So I think there's a number of stories like that where so American Beauty is the exact same arc, where Lester starts out with, a luxury car and a well-paying job and all the different stuff, and he's absolutely miserable. And his change comes when he realizes that the last time he was happy, he was flipping burgers for minimum wage. That he was happier with no money and no stuff than he is with a big house and 2 cars and all the rest of it. So in both those cases, there's kind of a reversal of the exterior and the interior. which I think, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that tends to that would speak to more to the view of the movie, or the lesson you're meant to take from the movie. In those cases, obviously, that money doesn't buy you happiness. That two changes together. So starting off with one strong thing, one thing that's going well, but another thing that's going poorly, and then reversing them, would give a kind of a life lesson to the whole thing, to say money doesn't buy you happiness, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, I always have a slight problem with the word theme, because it seems like people put themes onto things that the author might not necessarily have thought of as even having a theme. So To Kill a Mockingbird, for instance, people are constantly going on about what are the themes of To Kill a Mockingbird. Whereas I'm not sure, I could be completely wrong, but I'm not sure Harper Lee sat down with the themes directly in mind, considering that she wrote Go Set a Watchman, or is that what it's called? First. So she was writing without knowing even what the story was that she should be telling, and then came to it later. Yeah. So I don't think there's necessarily a theme there as much as a kind of a, I guess you'd say it's coming from the muse, or what you'd say, that it's, I'm not sure it needs to be as scientific and as technical as Stephen Pressfield says.
And thinking about his theory that everything should be working towards this theme, I don't think it would necessarily be possible, or at least possible for many approaches to writing, to do that. If his theory was the final polished published draft, everything should work towards your theme, I could see a kind of, well, you write the first draft and it's a horrible mess, because first drafts almost always are. And then you go through and you redraft it, and you change things, and you stick in new characters, and you think, oh, actually, I've discovered that this character is more about this rather than that. And you change the scenes so that the characters are more focused on the themes, and then you redraft and redraft and redraft, parsing away the things that are utterly irrelevant to your theme or contradict your chosen theme, slipping more thematic triggers and more semiotics in to embed the theme in everything, putting in blue curtains instead of yellow, and all of the other things that potentially the writers of famous books did, but 14-year-old boys on a Friday afternoon have absolutely no interest in hearing about. And at the end, you come out with this thing that's got your theme in, and then you give the book to someone and they say it's the best indictment of consumerism they've ever read. And that wasn't what you wrote at all. But at the point that you publish, you could potentially have stripped it to the point where it's all about your theme. But I think, unless you're editing as you go, which is a big thing to do, to decide to edit as you go, you're not going to be making all of your scenes, all of your this, all of your that about a single theme anyway, even if that's what you want to do.
I don't know. I mean, I think, as I say, the word theme kind of has negative connotations to me, in that I think the theme may emerge in the, as you say, in the eyes of the reader, because they're bringing their life experiences to things. Like a good example is Ender's Game. Most people who have read Ender's Game would say that it's about inclusion and the weak being worth something and that kind of stuff. Whereas Orson Scott Card, his personal beliefs are kind of the opposite from what the news says. And he says that's not what it's about at all. So I'm not sure that it's something that's within the author's control without it turning into a lecture. And if it's just a lecture, then it's not going to be a very interesting book. That said, I mean, Legend of Bagger Vance, which Stephen Pressfield wrote, is massive bestseller. So I think it goes back to, as well, it's what works for each author. That if that works for him, if he comes up with a book that that works very well under those principles, that's fine. But I'm not sure that it works for everyone. So I would, like you were talking about the Greek tragedy thing there, which made me think of Game of Thrones, where it tends to be that if a character does something that's slightly the honorable characters, if the honorable characters do something that's slightly dishonorable, then they're punished for it in the end. Whereas the dishonorable characters tend to be punished when they've been redeemed. So they're going along happily, massacring children or whatever they're doing, and then they turn around and go, actually, I'm doing it all for good reasons. That's the point at which they're in trouble, and you know, they're going to get chopped in half. And I don't think anyone would argue that Game of Thrones has a strong overriding theme. I don't think the characters there are embodying a certain theme. They're just people.
Well,
is my feeling.
I'd call that a strong flavour. If you wanted to describe Game of Thrones, it's high fantasy because there are dragons and magic and things that aren't human lurking in the edges and ancient powers awakening and all of that. And so it's got a high fantasy flavour to it, but it's also got a nobody's safe flavour to it, which isn't common in fantasy. Because usually in fantasy you start off following a character and they face challenges, but once you've worked out that okay, these are the protagonists. If it's classic high fantasy, the protagonists will get captured, beaten up, injured, become disillusioned, have their friends and family potentially die, potentially have their entire nation slaughtered, leaving them the sole survivor. But at the end of the book, they'll be limping along with the sword of Thrang, having defeated the Glarg of Katui. Whereas in Game of Thrones, that okay, this is a really major character, and shit, they're dead. It's like, oh, okay, well maybe they weren't the shit, they're dead too. So it's got a very brutal flavour from highly realistic fiction that's been added into the high fantasy, which produces a different flavour. And also, and I don't know if this is more emphasised in the series or whether it's throughout the books as well, it's got high octane sex that usually in fantasy, apart from maybe Piers Anthony, there isn't huge amounts of sexiness. Whereas in Game of Thrones, there's an awful lot of it, and there's incest right from the start, which
I'm trying to think of anything. So there's like, usually in terms of fantasy, it's they went up to the room, kiss, and then the next morning he woke up and blah blah blah.
Yeah. this thing. So it's in terms of theme as flavor, the themes of Game of Thrones are that sort of magic is not a myth. People are generally shits. They have a lot of sex, and being a really powerful person doesn't actually make you immortal. Sometimes you just end up dying horribly because this world is nasty, brutish, and foul. So it's definitely a flavor there. There's definitely theme in terms of if you were building a Game of Thrones theme park. There's lots of imagery to hang stuff on, but I wouldn't say that everything in Game of Thrones is about dying quickly while having lots of sex.
No, the other example I was thinking of was Lord of the Rings. So Lord of the Rings, it'd be difficult to talk about a theme there, because what is a theme? Everything goes better with friends. It would be a stretch. It's not good triumphing over evil, I guess, because as Stephen Colbert was pointing out during the week, Frodo fails. Frodo isn't able to cast. Sorry, this is a big spoiler, I guess. Anyway, yeah, spoiler. But Frodo isn't able to throw the ring into Mount Doom. He needs help to do it. Sam has to help him. So, is it the theme? So that's, I guess it may be my prejudice, but I think theme with a capital T is, as you say, the wrong word for it. If you were saying what's the change in Lord of the Rings,
yeah,
that's very easy to nail down.
And
that Frodo is, an innocent hobbit, and then ends up as, PTSD ridden survivor.
There's a huge image in there that they're almost Nietzschean. You can't actually comprehend the need to battle evil without becoming tainted by it. Because everyone is changed by the fighting of evil. And
you're trying to prove me wrong now, because that was a very succinct way of saying what the theme is.
But it isn't. It isn't that isn't theme the way he's using it, and it's not. Some of the people just walk away from it. I mean, Sam just walks away. He starts off as a man who lives in the Shire and fancies a barmaid, and he carries Frodo through hell. He is potentially, if you read it, in terms of actually who has agency, he's the hero of the piece. I mean, Gandalf pops up, goes away, pops up, goes away. Galadriel has power but never uses it. The elves fade away. But Frodo is the ring bearer, but potentially it's all a bait and switch, because the person who actually does what needs doing is Sam. And Sam isn't affected by the ring, really. And he's sad as opposed to happy. But he carries the ring, he carries Frodo, he carries pretty much everything and just slogs on while making light of what he is. And then at the end, when they've saved the world and everyone has become something different, he goes home and marries the barmaid that he fancies, having in the books done a whole second redeeming the Shire from evil. So he saves his home from Sauron. He saves his home from Saruman. And then he marries the barmaid he fancied at the start of the book and has happy little hobbit children. So unless you want to say it, well, the theme of the book is that evil taints you, but sometimes being tainted by evil means just that you gain just enough confidence to ask a girl out. Then suddenly sort of this big theme you can find in all of it doesn't fit the character who is actually pivotal to the story working.
Does Sam go through a change then? Is, as you say, he just kind of is always the stalwart companion?
Well, at the start, he's naive and scared of things. I mean, in terms of his conscious state, he doesn't. And he still thinks of himself. Even when they're sort of 2/3 of the way up Mount Doom and he's fighting spiders twice his size with one hand while carrying Frodo with the other, and he's wearing the ring of power that supposedly corrupts everyone and is infinitely heavy. And he's doing all of these things, and he's still acting like he's Mr. Frodo's gardener. And he does all of these things. And so internally, he grows up, I think. He goes from being someone who is childlike at the start, where he's listening at windows because of wizards. Wizards, Mr. Frodo, wizards. And then at the end, he marries Rosie, I think it's Rosie, and settles down. So he becomes more mature, but it's not the change that anyone else goes through. I mean, Aragorn was lurking in the corners of the world, dealing with evil, and then becomes king, and becomes a reasonably good king. And the elves do various elvish things, and the Riders of Rohan regain their ancestral honor and all go out in a Charge of the Light Brigade-ish kind of thing. But Sam doesn't fit the facing epic evils, because his change is going from being a man who's unable to speak to a pretty girl to being the man who marries her. So fundamentally, he's a kind of romance stroke comedy arc, which doesn't fit this epic, we have to get the thing to Mount Doom or the world will end.
I was thinking, as you were saying there, that he's a gardener who is not really, he still thinks of himself as a gardener. Is he like Peter Sellers' character in Being There, that he's not aware of? That's a bit of a reach, but I just thought it was quite funny. He's saving the world without knowing what he's doing. I'm just a gardener. I just happen to be doing this chore right now, but I'll be getting back to my gardening soon.
I suppose he could be the wise fool, that he's actually in tune with himself, that the ring doesn't affect him the same way it affects everyone else, because he doesn't want anything in the way that other people do. And Frodo wants a grand adventure, and he gets a grand adventure, but he's shattered by it. And Boromir wants to restore his nation to greatness. And all of the people who are affected by the ring want something. Apart from Sam, really, who want wants to be Mr. Frodo's gardener. And so the ring can't get a grip on him. So I suppose if you really drill down into it, you could say it's a story about Buddhism. That if you free yourself of desire, then the world cannot hurt you.
Yeah, but
achieve contentment. But and if you look at what Tolkien wrote down about the story, if you look at what C.S. Lewis wrote when he was talking to Tolkien, trying to convince him to write these stories rather than just create Elvish and create lots of lineages, and convincing him to actually write Lord of the Rings, as opposed to another 20-page saga about Finbar, Finn, or whatever the elven thing Tolkien's obsessed with that month. So he was rewriting stylistically rather than thematically. He was a professor of various ancient Northern European subjects. So his interest wasn't in writing a fantasy novel as we understand it. His core interest was in the existing sagas and creating a saga. So his uniting thing going into it was how historical sagas and lineages were created, which is why there's an awful lot of, and in those days lived a man who was the son of this man, who was the son of this man, who was the same man who did this, and not very much actual detailed characterization, particularly of women. Because if you read the Icelandic sagas, there is a lot of everyone knows their lineage back 6 generations and what all of their ancestors did, and you're famous because your great-great-grandfather was the brother of a man who did something really impressive, and not very much of what modern readers expect for characterization. So there's not really very much internal angst or self-doubt in sagas. So,
yeah. Grant, we've come to our usual stopping point. I think that was very interesting. I learned a lot, actually. Was there anything you wanted to add at the end, Dave, before we go?
I did have one small other point, which is sort of possibly a technical thing that comes out of the general point that we've agreed here today about things not always being one thing and being a balance of interacting factors, which is not when it comes to later drafts of a book, so redrafting, editing. One of the things I try to focus on in scenes, chapters, and so on is something that isn't the main thrust. So have a redraft of your horror story that's focused on humor, because the contrast makes the horror worse. So go through and maybe have some scenes where your focus is on a joke. Have 2 people telling a joke or doing something a little bit wacky, and have it be that's what the scene is about. It's not like they're going, hey, let's put buckets on our heads just because we're bored, and then try to joust with brooms. And then because they've got a bucket on their head, they don't see the monster in time, and so they get killed. Just have them do that, have them pratfall. And the contrast between the humor of that and the fact there is a monster out there makes the horror feel stronger for many people, and saves you having to use another thesaurus full of adverbs and adjectives and stick in another gory scene. So you can reduce the amount of actual hard horror you put in, reducing both the amount of readers who will put the book aside because it's just got too gory, and the amount of readers who will put the book aside because, well, we've heard about the tentacle monster tearing someone in half from head to toe, and now they've torn someone in half the other way round. It's like, yeah. So, whereas if you've got people living ordinary comic lives and then someone is torn in half by a tentacle monster, it's more of a punch for less, I'm not going to say effort, because each scene's the amount of effort, but for less horror in terms of actual words on page.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of benefit in that, because often you come up with something that's just for a joke, and then if there's a sequel or something later in the series, you go, oh, that thing that was just a joke can now be a major plot point, and I look like a genius for saying it 5 books ago.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The thing that would really, well, potentially it would hit you harder than it hits me, because potentially you do that kind of thing more often, is that if you want to write a series, if you don't know what all of the books are going to be about, so you suddenly have like, oh, I could reuse that. You can't go back to a published book and change that scene so it fits the theme of a book that's 3 books later in the series. So the further you get into a series, the less space you'd have to go, well, all of the things in this book are about X. Because they've got to come from a whole bunch of other stuff. And so if you go, well, I'll write all of the books so they have the same theme, it's going to be Series 10 syndrome, where your television series or your book series or whatever doesn't really get any more ratings because you've used up the ideas in the first series, and then you get to about Series 10 of a hugely popular series. Babylon 5 didn't make it that far. I think they made it to 5, but Stargate made it to 10. A couple of other things have made it to 10 series, and just you can see the reuse.
Yeah, I mean,
looking for a way to reboot it, to bring in freshness, and the characters are just so established that you change characters for new characters, and eventually you end up with something that isn't the same as the first season at all. And there are only so many ways you can have, for example, a bunch of soldiers with a token alien go through a gate to other worlds, and only so many sets of the smart one, the funny one, the cynical one you can do. And so you mix it up, but confining yourself to one thing rather than going, well, we'll make it about the narrow interactions, the things that don't fit the theme, the things that go, oh, that's different. That's not more of the same.
I mean, I never really liked the Stargate TV show that much, because it was kind of, as you say, it was just cookie cutter kind of episodes. Whereas Stargate Universe, I don't know if you watched that show, Dave.
I have. It's a real shame that didn't get picked up more.
Yeah, because it was far better. It was closer to what Game of Thrones is. It was anything can happen. It's about the characters and the fact that they can do things. Like the main captain guy was doing stuff that you might not agree with, but he thought he was doing the right thing, and other people thought they were doing the right thing, and no one was doing things just to be, a mustache twirling evil person. They were just doing the best they could for their people or for their own situation. So yeah, anyway, we're coming up in an hour, so we should probably stop.
Yeah.
As I say, it was very interesting, and thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.